A very warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Lockdown LitFest event. As ever, we hope you're well, we hope you're keeping safe, and we hope you're being careful. If you were a live audience, I'd get you to put your hands up now, so I know how much you love audience participation. And I'd say, how many of you are huge fans of fantasy fiction? And I'd expect to see all 20,000 of you put your hands up because you've all watched Game of Thrones, you've all read Lord of the Rings. Well, do we have a treat in store for you today? For we have two fine writers of young adult fantasy fiction who go by the names of Katharine and Elizabeth Corr. Would you please give them a huge welcome to the Lockdown LitFest stage? Hello, Katharine. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi. Thanks so much for having us.
It's lovely to see you. Quick question. Is it Katharine and Elizabeth, or do you prefer Kate and Liz?
Kate and Liz is fine, I think, yeah.
And Katharine's in grey and Liz is in red, for those of you watching in black and white. Mm-hmm. Let's start with the beginning. I have to confess, I'm a huge fan of your writing, and I was a sort of early adopter of what I think was your first book, which is A Witch's Kiss, which introduced me and indeed the world to your fantastic rule-breaking teenage witch, Merry. But was that the first book you wrote together, or was it the first book you wrote? Oh, did you write stuff individually beforehand? Talk us through how you came, what the run-up to The Witch's Kiss was.
Liz, do you want to?
Yes, I was a stay-at-home mum with, I think, two quite small children, and I'd been reading Stephanie Meyer's Twilight, and I just literally thought, oh, this is so cool, I love it. I've always loved writing, so I thought I'd have a go at writing something myself. And I got about 60,000 words in, and I hit a brick wall. And Katharine had been doing some courses at a local education centre and doing some writing courses. So she joined me for a little bit of fun, but we actually sort of got the whole way through the manuscript in the end and finished the story. And my aunt said to us, why don't you send it in to an agent? You know, you've done it, just send it off somewhere. And we did. And we actually got some full manuscript requests and quite a bit of interest.
And who was the lucky agent to whom you sent it?
We sent it to several, but the one that did show quite a bit of interest was, Blair.
But we didn't get an agent from that book, though.
We didn't get an agent from the book, but we did get quite a lot of interest in that one. And they said to us, I think is it Blair Partnership?
Yeah.
They said to us, they weren't quite sold on that story, and they said, do you have anything else that you've written? And we had absolutely nothing. So we quickly wrote The Witch's Kiss in about 6 months, and then started sending that out. And then we got a couple of agents asked to take us on, and we eventually, because we just really clicked with Claire Wilson from RCW.
Right. Excellent. Katharine, or Kate rather, what's your memory of this? Because, of course, the clue lies in what Elizabeth said. She'd started writing, you've been doing some courses, and then Liz very subtly segued into wrote. So I'm interested in that. There are a lot of people I know who write, husbands and wives who write. There's a fantastic couple in East Anglia that write the most amazing crime fiction as a husband-wife writing duo. But that segue into writing together, given that writing is normally not a collaborative thing unless you're writing screenplays, but writing novels, it's quite tricky. How did that work? What was the division of labour? Did you have rules?
We didn't really initially. I mean, we've both written from when we were small, but neither of us had ever finished anything. We'd gone down that classic route of, writing 3 chapters of something and then deciding it was much easier to keep editing the same 3 chapters over and over than actually to finish the manuscript. So neither of us really finished anything. And we'd tried out different genres and formats and so on. And then initially, I didn't really have much confidence in what I was doing. So I said to Lizzie I would just help her out and maybe, try and help her get over this block because she'd written so much. And then it just became something which we so enjoyed doing together. And I think because we're so close, we didn't really find it difficult to talk about where the book should go or how the characters should develop. It was much more of a natural conversation. And I don't know if you write at all, but it became such a real world that we would spend so much time talking about it and sort of inhabiting it. And it wasn't until I think we started taking it more seriously and we thought actually maybe we could do something with this that we started thinking about how our writing process works. So really that was with, I think the second book, which is what turned into The Witch's Kiss, which wasn't called The Witch's Kiss originally. So that's the second book that we completed together. So I think at that point we were more thinking about how do we divide up the writing process. But to be honest, we're not very structured about that. We tend to, we have sort of a division, but we end up just writing what we like, and we rewrite bits that the other person's written already, and end up sometimes fighting, but because you get on so well, it doesn't matter.
To answer your question, yes, I've written for about 30 years and had quite a few books published in the 90s, so I understand the dynamic only so well. You've obviously settled on fantasy fiction. Can we talk about why that was the choice of genre? I like that you said you tried a number of genres. What were the other genres you tried?
I think Liz had written something which was a contemporary kind of, I guess, more shopaholic.
Yes.
What's her name? That kind of
chick lit, wasn't it? I think that's what we used to call it.
The word I hate, but that was what it was. And I'd always tried to write fantasy because I was such a massive Tolkien fan as a teenager. So I'd always gone down that route of, elves and etc. Some very, really, really bad Tolkien fanfic, which nobody is ever going to see. So.
Why was it bad? And I mean, obviously, there are other people who sort of channel Tolkien. There's a very famous Canadian author called Guy Gavriel Kay, who wrote a thing called The Film of Our Tapestry based on his study of Tolkien. Had you come across him, or were you just, because I know there are a lot of Tolkien fans who are Tolkien purists, are you one of those, or did you read around as well?
I think when I first started writing, I was a Tolkien purist, so I was very much, but I think that was the trouble. I was very young when I started doing it, and it was really derivative, and I think writing is something you should get better at the whole time. I think there should be an ongoing journey of improving and refining your craft and so on. So which always makes me, the whole sort of focus on debuts, it always confuses me from that point of view. I think the first book shouldn't really be the best book. You hopefully keep getting better. So to go back to the Tolkien thing. So I didn't have any idea what I was doing when I was initially writing. I literally awful. So but I was probably only 17 or 16 or younger, so I don't know.
I think you're allowed to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
Liz, what was your dynamic? I mean, were you happy to jump on board the fantasy fiction genre choice? Was that a mutual decision?
Yes, I think so, because we had just started reading a lot of YA in our 30s. Funnily enough, being stay-at-home mums, and Twilight, as I mentioned before, really captured our imagination. And I think we always loved fantasy growing up. We've always read a lot of the same books, and one author we've always loved is Terry Pratchett, and we've read, I think, pretty much all his books several times over. And we loved a lot of fantasy when we were growing up. And Susan Cooper's The Darkest Rising series, which is 5 books, we both devoured. So anything fantasy, E.S. Nesbit. So I think it was actually, although we've both got our different strengths, and if we ever go off and write differently, Katharine probably would lean towards historical fiction, where I would probably lean towards a sort of funny kind of contemporary book, such as like Bridget Jones, something like that. I think for us together, our strength is writing fantasy.
I got a little funny. Terry was an old friend of mine, and I miss him
Really?
today. Yeah.
Amazing.
The last few books that he put out, he and I would go on tours together, and I'd be his sort of interviewer of choice. And it's a funny little story. He knew his audience so well. We got to know his audience so well that at the end of a sort of 40-minute conversation on stage around the world, up and down the country, I'd say, we're now going to turn to audience questions. And he'd say, now, Paul, before we start, can I just say that the answer to the first question is going to be a little small shop behind a window down a back alley in Shepherd's Bush. The audience go, what on earth is Terry Pratchett talking about? And then I go to the audience and I say, right, let's have time for you to ask your question. And the first person in the first row will go, Mr. Pratchett, I've got a question for you. Where do you get your ideas from? And it was a nice moment, and the whole audience would laugh and so on and so forth. Yes. You can't go wrong with Terry Pratchett.
No, he's amazing.
Let's come to the Witches trilogy then. Did you plan it as a trilogy to begin with? Are you authors who map things out, or are you the sort of authors, you map things out and you have in your writing shed walls and walls and walls of post-it notes with plot lines and character backgrounds and so on and so forth, like Philip Pullman does? Or do you gently find your way forward? How does that work?
I think it's a bit of a mix of both. I mean, as I said before, with the Witches' Kiss, we literally thought we had some interest from this particular agent, but we didn't have anything else to give them. So we thought, quick, let's write something. And we had various ideas in our head. Katharine was working on something else. And then I just saw something on television. It was a film, and I saw this black lake and these mountains by the side of it, and I just started thinking about lakes. I was listening to that Christine Perry song as well, Jar of Hearts, and all these little hearts and rows, and it just kind of came to me overnight. And I literally did something like a 14-page outline the next day, and I showed it to Katharine, and she stopped writing what she was working on then, and we started doing this together and then mapping it out properly. I mean, it obviously changed quite a lot from my original idea, and it became our idea. But that was an example. That particular one, we just kind of made it up as we were going along. There's no sort of structure. It was definitely a standalone. We didn't think it was going to go into a 3-book series.
Katharine?
Yeah, it wasn't. As Liz said, it wasn't planned as a trilogy. It was when the book got bought by HarperCollins that they wanted to extend it. But in terms of the general writing process, because there's two of us, we have to be pretty organised. We have to both know where we're going in terms of the final direction of the story. So we usually start with a fairly detailed, maybe like a 4-act outline or some kind of chapter outline or something. But it's an iterative process, so we always end up rewriting the outline as we're going along and kind of refining it. So, we do outline, then we write a bit, then we go back to the outline and rewrite that, and so on. But I like to know where I'm going. I am the kind of writer I've got files and index cards and, the whiteboard sticky things that you stick on the wall. So lots of notes.
I always find these things engender great confidence. Let's come to character, because of course, the great creation that the two of you have created is, as I said, this sort of rule-breaking teenage witch, Merry, who, when we first meet her in The Witch's Kiss, is 16 years old. Is that about right?
Yeah.
Talk us how did she come to you both, and what's your relationship with her? How has the relationship with you as the author changed with your character over the course of the 3 books? Because of course, anybody who writes series has this sort of shifting ebb and flow of relationship with the character that they create, and you get that magical, what I call sort of the alchemy of authorship, where the character sort of takes on a life of their own, and they start to tell you what they want to do. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
How did Merry come to you?
I think because she originally we plucked from a fairy story, I suppose, because what Lizzie was coming up with was a sort of gender-reversed Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah.
So Merry was loosely inspired initially by one of the 3 witches. The Disney version, there's the 3 little fairies. But obviously, we wanted to be a lot darker than that. So Merry is Meredith, because one of the witches or the fairies in the Disney version is Merry. And we wanted to explore, I think, because it's YA is coming of age, and one of those aspects of coming of age, which is so difficult, is learning what you're good at or what you're not good at, and figuring out how you're going to use these potential talents you have, whether you want to use them, what kind of things you want to pursue, and realizing that something that you might want, which is in Mary's case, this sense of normality, is maybe not achievable for her because she's got these other pressures which are, which I think is something which happens in, thinking back to our own childhood, our mum wasn't that well a lot of the time, so there's stuff that you might want to do that you can't do because you've got other things that you have to prioritise. And obviously with Mary, it's fantasy, it's witchcraft. So there was that initial drive of her resisting the gifts that she had and seeing it really as a burden. And then I think as the story progressed, it became, it was like a sort of a journey of accepting the power, and then getting to that point where the power becomes a temptation in itself. I think by the end of the second book, where she's really got sort of much more control over her power, but and realised how powerful she is, but she doesn't know quite how to handle it still. And that the tipping over almost into, well, I could go down this route of going to the dark side, to use the Star Wars metaphor, if I wanted to, which is all part of the growing up process again. I think, do you want to jump in here, Liz? Or?
Yeah, I think also we wanted to write a YA story which celebrated all different forms of love, not this sort of traditional teen romance, but I mean there is romance in the book, but also family connection. So Mary and Leo, I think, are very much based in lots of ways on Katharine and I.
Leo's Meredith's brother. We should point out Leo's Meredith's brother.
Yes, Leo is Mary's older brother, and I think the relationship and the dynamics between them are very based on our relationship.
Right.
That we did have a mum who was ill for quite a lot of our childhood, and then when I first had my children, my youngest was ill quite a lot, and then unfortunately my husband passed away about 5 years ago. So that was just when we were writing the book, and I think it was very important to us to write something which drew on our experiences of looking after each other and that sibling bond. And there's other very important family relationships, such as the brother and sister's relationship with their grandma.
Yeah. This might be difficult, so forgive me. I don't wish to step on any toes. But when you're writing YA fiction, young adult fiction, your readers tend to be of an age where every emotional experience is super heightened. And they feel things, as we all do, very, very deeply. But those first, the first love, the first kiss, the first grief, as a teenager or as a young adult, is incredibly important. And I'm wondering, given what you've just said about your mum and being ill, whether there was any sense of drawing down on that wellspring of emotion and putting it into your fiction. I'm not going to use the word catharsis, but are you either of you aware, or was there a conscious decision that you had emotions that you felt keenly that you could draw upon and transmit to your audience?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think in what Katharine was saying earlier about sometimes as a child having to prioritise other people in the family, even though you were quite little, and to be aware of things which I think that sometimes we shouldn't have been aware of at that age.
Yeah.
I think it's been the same for my children growing up, watching their dad become very ill and pass away, and I think we drew on that and our relationship with our mum, and I think, again, as I said before, and our relationship with siblings, that we've always had each other's back and always looked after each other.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the key of it, rather than exploring other family relationships. But so I don't know if it was cathartic so much as just wanting to highlight how special that relationship is, because it's been a very profound relationship for me. My sister has kept my head above water at various times.
Yeah, and I think that really, looking across the three books in particular, that it's despite the romance in the book, that it's the sibling relationship which is at its heart. That it starts with her and Leo and it ends with her and Leo, which I thought was really, which we wanted to do because that's, it was a bookending of the trilogy, that she shouldn't be off with the boyfriend at the end, that she should be with her brother, because that's always going to be the key relationship there for her.
Yes, blood is thicker. I mean, it's a fantastic trilogy. One last question for me, and then I'm going to invite one of you to read, if possible. Given that you're writing for a highly defined audience group, what do you feel? Do you feel the responsibility you have to your readers? Because these books have now become incredibly popular. So do you feel that you have an emotional responsibility to them to deliver answers as well as to pose problems? Katharine.
I think it's a difficult question, because obviously we're writers, we're not therapists or medical personnel or any way. And I think sometimes we have had emails from people saying they're sort of sharing details, which is not something you'd normally come across as without outside those kind of relationships. I think in terms of responsibility, it's more in a sense of representation, particularly thinking about diversity and thinking about where the characters come from, that you don't want everybody to be the same. And particularly close to my heart is thinking about the sexual diversity, that everybody shouldn't just be straight, and it shouldn't just all be heterosexual relationships which are portrayed. Obviously it's become slightly different. It's slightly different in our new book because that's high fantasy, so the challenges are a bit different, but I think that's where I would say the responsibility is. And also presenting people who aren't stereotyped, presenting young women particularly as young women rather than it's difficult because people want aspirational characters, but I don't want to necessarily write somebody who thinks like a 40-something-year-old but just happens to be in a 16-year-old's body, if that makes any sense. So I think there should be some element of, you want to see the journey, I think, of learning and growing up, rather than somebody who's basically already grown up and knows how to deal with everything.
I think it's very elegantly put, Katharine. Liz, do you want to come in on that?
I just think we've always tried very hard to make our characters realistic and relatable. And we're not obviously in our teenage years anymore, but we remember graphically what it was like.
Of course, we all do.
Everyone does. And we have tried very hard to, as Katharine said, to make sure they did act and sound like 16-year-olds, rather than these super confident 40-year-olds who have all the answers, just trapped in the body of a 16-year-old. Hopefully that comes across. People have said they found the two heroines relatable, but I think the problem for YA writers is also that you have to make a heroine aspirational as well. So people want them to be strong, they want them to be, in a way, to be all powerful and to be able to lead these lives that you as a reader can't.
Yeah, I think what I'd add on that is that, and I can see why that's also necessary, because you're reading. I mean, I think YA is actually read by people at all ages, even if they don't necessarily talk about it. But looking at the core audience, at that age, you don't know. You're trying on different personalities, so you almost want to be able to see all these different kinds of people in the books, so that you can kind of find maybe where you think you'd like to end up potentially.
At which point, Liz, would you mind very much treating us to an extract
Absolutely.
Of one of the Witches trilogy to introduce us?
Sorry, shall I just read the prologue? That's what I was thinking.
If that's what you'd like to read, I'm very happy with that. Yes, that'd be most kind. Thank you. And which book is it from?
Yeah, so the prologue is set back in Anglo-Saxon England.
Hold on 1 second, Liz. Which book are you reading from?
Sorry, The Witch's Kiss.
Fantastic, thank you.
And then in chapter 1, the action jumps forward to modern day Surrey. So this is the opening prologue. The kingdom of the South Saxons, 522 AD. Witches do not kneel. They do not grovel. They do not beg for favours from any creature, mortal or immortal. At most, they bargain. Meredith knew this, had known it for as long as she could remember. But as she scrambled up the steep hillside, shredding her skirts and her skin on the long thorns of may trees, the things that she had been certain of were no longer enough. Finally, she reached the summit. This place was not holy, but very, very old. Meredith passed through the outer ring of pine trees, so tall and close growing. They blocked out the sun and the wind, walking on until she got close to the single oak, growing at the centre of the circle. The oak was twisted and split with age, green foliage flecked with cream, not flowers, but bones, tied to the branches, littering the ground beneath. Then Meredith knelt. She cleared a space in front of her, sweeping away the bones and dead leaves until the earth beneath was revealed. She pulled out a knife out of her belt. She had no offering to bargain with. She had only herself. This I pledge. Her voice was weak. She swallowed, ran her tongue over her cracked lips, and tried again. This I pledge. By the time the charmed sleep ends, one of my children's children will be ready to face Gwydion, to defeat him and to remove all traces of his enchantments from the face of the earth. We shall have vengeance. An echo seemed to come from the encircling trees, throwing her words back to her. Vengeance, vengeance. Without hesitating, Meredith pressed the point of the knife into her palm, dragging the blade slowly downwards to split the skin, allowing blood to drip from her outstretched hand onto the ground. I swear not by the gods, nor by men, but by the bones and ancient soul of this land to bind myself and my descendants to this fate, fate, fate. With one finger dipped in the blood, Meredith traced a shape on the ground, a binding ruin. For a moment it glowed white against the dark earth before burning away into smoke.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's Elizabeth Corr reading the prologue from the first of the Witches trilogy, The Witch's Kiss. Apologies for the sound quality on this. As we've told you all so many times before, we're still in our infancy and we're doing the best we can with the technology we have available. But beautifully read, Liz. Thank you very much indeed. Can we come now to your latest book, which is a departure from the Witches trilogy, but still very much within fantasy fiction, and seems to me to mark a rather major step change in the quality, not necessarily the quality, but the direction of your writing, forgive me. It's called A Throne of Swans, beautiful title. It's published by Hotkey Books, which are part of Bonnier, and it has this most extraordinary character, the 70-year-old Aderin, who is the protector of Atratis. Is it? I don't know how to pronounce it because I've only read it in my head, of course. But is it Atratis?
Yeah, Atratis.
And of course, it's a marvelous sort of. It's a band of people who can transform at will into the bird that best represents their family line. Have I got that right?
Yes. Yeah.
She's a swan, which has all those resonances of Leda being the mother of Helen of Troy and Castor and Polydeuces and so on and so forth. So can you tell us, please, what the inspiration was for A Throne of Swans, which I am a huge fan of?
Thank you. So the inspiration was actually from my younger daughter who dances. She's done ballet lessons for years and years and loves it. And she said to me one day, Mum, what would be really good is if you did something on Swan Lake. So I started thinking about it with Liz, and we played around with this idea for probably a year before we actually put pen to paper, I think, or fingers to keyboard. We didn't, I don't know if you know the ballet story, but it's quite a thin story, and it doesn't really tell you much about the villains, which is what we became interested in. So we started thinking about doing something from the perspective of the Black Swan, Adele, the daughter of the evil wizard in the ballet. What were her motivations? Where had she come from? And really from that, we constructed this whole, we're discussing about what would happen if you had a whole country where people could transform, not because of a spell, but because that was their innate ability to transform into birds. Because it's such a dream for lots of people to fly if they could have a magic spell. And then, we wanted to reflect, I guess, the historical reality of this noble elite and the sort of underclass. So the setting is kind of 18th century Britain, I guess, but obviously in a high fantasy world. So that's where it came from. So it was Swan Lake, and you've got echoes there, also the Children of Lear, the Irish folk tale where the stepmother curses the children to turn into swans, and the Swan Maiden or Swan Knight folk stories, which sort of feed into the Swan Lake ballet, I think.
Had you been fans of the film Black Swan with Natalie Portman?
I've never seen it. I haven't seen it yet.
That does surprise me because I sort of saw resonances of that throughout this. That's extraordinary. Liz, what's your comment on the origins of House of Swans? Throne of Swans, sorry.
Well, just as Katharine said, really, I think the initial idea came from my niece Victoria, and then we were sort of, as we like to invert stories, as we did with The Witch's Kiss, which is a gender reversed retelling of Sleeping Beauty. We were thinking about, as Katharine said, doing another version of Swan Lake, but from the antagonist's point of view, just thinking about what made Adil so horrible and her father, it's so evil. So I think it took quite a bit longer than The Witch's Kiss for us to kind of finalise the whole story in our heads, and it did change shape quite a lot. I think it probably took about 18 months, but I think it was worth it. I think we're so happy with it. I mean, we love The Witch's Kiss that we found that we have actually progressed and as writers, we're very proud of this one in particular.
The various houses of Solanum, which I think there are 5 or 6, Cygnus Generis, Cygnus Atratis, Cygnus Anceris, Corax Anceris, Cygnus Alderis, and Cygnus Brithis, all of which have fantastic mottos and heraldry. I get the impression you probably had a lot of fun designing each of these and coming up with the background, which, I mean, I hate to say that, but it strikes me, it has resonances of Game of Thrones, I'm sure you're aware. And I'm sure it's not by accident that the beautiful cover for this book has the most exquisite 3-dimensional throne on it.
Yeah, we've been absolutely spoiled. The designers at Bonnier, I've got their names here, so I should give them a shout out. So it's Alexandra Auden and Steve Newman, who did the throne, and Sally Taylor, who did the crest. I mean, they're absolutely amazing, and we're completely, grateful to them for making the book so beautiful. And I think, there's definitely the Game of Thrones is there, and I think because both, we're also looking back to the Plantagenets, of course, which is I think where the Game of Thrones idea came from for George Martin, and that's if you look at the family tree, I think is it Edward the Second, or I can't remember which Edward it was. He had all those kids who then ended up fighting in the Wars of the Roses. I think it must have been Edward the Third. So I thought that idea was so interesting. This taking it from history, that you've got all of these people who all have a claim to the throne, and are always jostling and looking out to see who's weakest and where they can potentially sort of advance their own cause.
I think Katharine was very keen on us having both a family tree and a map.
Right.
So sort of writer wish list. She was happy she had those two things.
Yeah, no, that was a definite author goals there. So.
It's also nice for the merchandising as well. I don't know how many godchildren I've had to buy the Lord of the Rings map for. All those things. There's an element of loss in this one as well, because of course Adira has lost her mother and father, which frees her up to do all sorts of things. I assume that was a conscious decision, that she is freed from sort of parental restrictions in a way, but also has the responsibility of sort of self-determination.
Yeah, I think it's both the enabler and the driver of her story, because the fact that she's now allowed to leave the castle, which her father had basically locked her inside, obviously allows the story to happen. But the driver for the story is this sense of needing to find out what happened to her mum and to take revenge. So that's really, she steps up with this quite naive idea that I think she's going to get to the Citadel and find out who did it and be like, oh, well, it was you and I'm going to, get justice somehow. And she learns that it is far more complicated than she had assumed. And also that just looking for revenge isn't in itself going to give her what she's looking for, which is some kind of the ability to come to terms with what she witnessed and what happened to her and what happened to her mum. And at the same time, learning, that she learns stuff about her dad, which completely, she then has to rewrite her picture of him in her head. And there's some element of that in, hang over into the second book, that she's got to deal with all this stuff that she wasn't expecting to deal with. So,
We'll come to the second book in a minute. I mean, I like the fact that it turns in, it starts off being, you think it's going to be quite a straightforward whodunit, and it turns into a much more elegant and rather richer experience of a whydunit as much as anything. Was that conscious, Liz?
Sorry, the sound cut out in the last bit. Could you repeat it?
It has its origin. It has as its start point what you think is going to be a fairly linear whodunit, but segues into a very nice whydunit rather than the whodunit. And I'm wondering whether that was planned ahead.
I think the story did change quite a lot from start to finish, and I think what you were talking about earlier, Paul, about characters almost taking on a life of their own, and then starting to push you in a certain direction. And I think the ending was initially probably a little bit different than we thought, and than we planned. I think the stuff with her father developed. I can't.
I understand what you're trying to say. Let's come to another character, because, of course, there's a fantastically dark character in this who is the uncle, who's also the king. He's the head of the royal court. He's basically the control of the citadel. How much fun did you have writing him?
Oh, lots of fun. I think the villains are always lots of fun. We really enjoyed writing him. And, of course, so he was very much, I mean, we both did history degrees, so he is like kind of, Henry VIII, pretty much. I would say that.
Henry VIII plus, probably.
Who?
Henry VIII plus, I think.
Henry VIII plus. And Siegfried was a lot of fun to write as well. We just, because somebody who's manipulative like he is, I think is, you don't know where they're going to end up. And he definitely was a character that was telling us where to go with him, with his story as we went along.
Was Martin an influence in any of this? Have either of you read Song of Fire and Ice?
I've read the first. I haven't read the whole thing. I read the first 3 books, I think, and I didn't watch the TV show, to be honest, because it was a bit. I can read stuff, but I find I have a low tolerance when I'm watching stuff. So, I guess yes and no, but we didn't want to. We didn't want to do anything which would be too obviously. We didn't want to be derivative, obviously, so we try to steer away from anything too consciously like that, other than the general sense of the families and the fighting for the throne, which you can get from the history, obviously. I think, but that's the feel of it, the sort of the grunginess, I guess, of the characters, the machinations, and the reality of this kind of, where you've got the gorgeous court and the glitter and the beauty, and at the same time this horrible underbelly and the sort of life of the flightless. That sort of feel, rather than anything like very specific.
I mean, it strikes me as being, I was writing some notes when I was reading yesterday, that it's a fantastic sort of historic and dystopian dynasty, if you want to. I rather like that. Katharine, I believe you are going to treat us to a wonderful reading of or from A Throne of Swans. Would you like to introduce and read for us, please? Yeah,
of course. So I'm going to read the prologue, which introduces us to Katharine, who is our main character. And it sets up the beginning of the story, so it gives her the opportunity, sees her take control and decide, or give her the opportunity at least, that she's going to be able to leave the castle finally. So I'm going to read those few pages. It is nearly midnight, and my father is dying. The physicians continue to scurry around him, grinding up herbs with pestles, or chanting over their poultices. But the lavender-scented smoke of the fire can't mask the odour of decaying flesh. Candlelight can't conceal the laboured breath, the claw-like fingers clutching convulsively at the bedclothes. He pushes the nearest doctor away, irritable, and beckons me closer. The doctors mutter about infection. Still, I obey. As I balance on the edge of the massive oak-framed bed, my red silk skirts are like a spill of blood in the dimness. I lean in, holding tight to one of his hands. This, he gestures to the weeping sores on his chest and shoulders. A mistake. I stayed too long. And the contagion. His speech is thickened as if his tongue is swollen. I'm sorry, Adrian. I understand him. The sickness that has ravaged one of our port towns for the last month has led to quarantine and death. My father, to help his people, or in the cause of science, or both, stayed with the afflicted, hoping to discover a cure. He has gambled his life in pursuit of knowledge before, but this time he lost. And now he wants absolution. I try to tell him that all will be well, that the doctors might still find a way to save him, but the lie catches in my throat. Instead, I stare into his clouded eyes and murmur, I know, it's late, Father, you should rest. But he shakes his head and grits his teeth, blinking, trying to focus. I want you to stay here once I'm gone. Stay in the castle. His words are not new. I've been confined within our castle and the peninsula upon which it stands for years. So many years that I long ago stopped asking when I would be allowed to leave. I've learned that it's possible to stand in the open air with the wind on my face and still suffocate. That it is possible to command others and still be a prisoner. You must stay. He breaks off in a paroxysm of coughing. A servant darts in and wipes the blood and spittle from his chin. Stay here where it's safe. Promise me. Perhaps his sickness is finally claiming his mind. If I never leave, I cannot do what will be required of me. And I cannot believe my father truly expects me to become my own jailer, trapped behind these walls through an oath of my own making. But I am wrong, apparently. He grips my upper arm tightly, pulling himself up, the pressure of his fingers still painful despite his loss of strength. Promise me, Adrian. You know I love you. All I want is, he gasps with pain, to protect you. I know you love me, Father, and I love you too, but I make no promise. I won't lie to him now. Mercifully, he does not notice my omission. He sinks back into the mattress, eyelids fluttering as the clock begins playing the chimes that lead to the hour. Good. You'll understand eventually, I hope. And finally, your mother. Words fade into silence. Father? What about her? Please, if there's anything you haven't told me, anything. My voice seems to be coming from a long way away. I shake his shoulder. Father! The doctors cluster around and I am moved gently to one side as they check pulse and breathing and heartbeat. And then someone is closing his eyes, drawing the sheet up over his face. The clock strikes the hour. Your Grace? For a moment I don't understand. I think, my father is dead, he can't answer you. But the servant repeats the question. Your Grace? And then I realise he is addressing me. I am no longer a 17-year-old girl who can spend her time exactly as she wishes. I am no longer merely Lady Aderin. I am Her Grace, protector of the dominion of Atratis, sole mistress of Mile Castle and all the lands that belong to it. Somehow, in the space between the end of one day and the start of the next, everything has changed.
Fantastic. That's Katharine Corr reading the prologue from their latest work entitled A Throne of Swans and published by Hotkey Books, which is part of Bonnier. If you want more incitement to get into this fantastic work, Vic James, who's the author of the Dark Gifts trilogy, has written of it, a dark and glittering fairy tale to make your heart take flight. I love this world of ruthless noble intrigue and a heroine who must earn her wings. It's a fantastic piece. Final question from me for the both of you. How do you follow that? Is there a book 2 of A Throne of Swans?
There is.
Is it called A Castle of Swans?
No.
Of Swans?
It's called A Crown of Talons, which is the ancient crown of Solanum, which she sees briefly when she gets to the castle. And it's hopefully, I mean, I guess, I don't know exactly because the, who knows what's happening with the schedules given what's going on in the world, but hopefully it's going to be published in January next year. And we've seen the draft cover and it's really good. So.
Yeah.
My last question is to you, Liz. Your sisters, you're obviously very close, you're obviously very supportive of each other, but do you have a strategy for when there are, should we call them artistic differences?
Yeah, well, her strategy seems to be telling me to shut up and that she's wrong, I'm wrong, and she's right. And we get, and my strategy is just to send into some very juvenile behaviour and just to wind her up quite a lot, I think. But when we have a real problem, there's only a couple of times where we really got stuck and, at loggerheads as to the direction the plot should go or what should happen to a character. And I think both those times we went to our editor and our editor had final say. So we're kind of 1-1 in that respect. But
yeah, we're keeping score.
Yes, we are.
You're obviously competitive. Same question to you then, Katharine. I mean, do you have a strategy? It sounds like you win more than you lose, but...
because she's older, that's why.
How kind are you to your doting younger sister?
I'm mostly really kind. I'm the one. She'd never get to a single event without me because I'm the one who organises the trains.
We're talking about your sister. You've already turned it to talking about yourself. I see how that works. The main thing I want to ask you this. I mean, these are joyous books to read. Are they joyous to write?
Yes, I think particularly it was more difficult with the first trilogy because we didn't, we were learning and we had different editors and so it was a more painful process. But with Throne of Swans, it's been absolutely brilliant. We loved writing it, and our editors at Hotkey are amazing.
Give them a name check. Who's your editor at Hotkey?
So Carla Hutchinson is our main editor, and Emma Matthewson is also, who's the publishing director, I think, has been overseeing it as well. So they're both brilliant, and we love working with them.
They've been a real delight to work with Hotkey.
Well, congratulations to the both of you. This is a fantastic work. I think you've got a fantastic back catalogue behind you, and hopefully a very impressive career in front of you too. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here today. You've been listening to me discussing A Throne of Swans, more likely, with Katharine and Elizabeth Corr, published by Hotkey Books, and their initial series, which included The Witch's Kiss, Witch's Tears, and The Witch's Blood. And if you haven't discovered those yet, you may very well enjoy them. If you are watching this on YouTube, head to the www.lockdownlitfest.com website. And if you turn to the Corr's author page, you'll find not only details of the book, A Throne of Swans, but also a lovely button which will point you into the direction of going to buy it. As ever, thank you very much, Liz and Kate, for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to meet you for the first time.
Thank you so much. It's been a delight.
And thank you to you for joining us. Wherever you are in the world, we hope that you are well, we hope that you're safe, and we hope that you're taking great care of yourself and those you love. Thank you for joining us. Cheerio.